Welcome, traveler of the night. If your mind still drifts among the echoes of the day, let this story be a gentle harbor, a place where thought and sound fade softly into stillness. Before we begin, take a deep breath. Let the world outside quiet itself and allow the rhythm of ancient times to guide you. The gods of Olympus once whispered through the wind and waves, their tales woven not in thunder, but in calm. Tonight, we follow one such story, of Apollo, the radiant god of light, who one day decided to teach humankind something more precious than gold or glory. He taught them how to sing. So rest easy. Let your breath slow with the music of time. The sound you hear beneath my words, the faint hum, the distant lyre, is how the ancients believed dreams began. Now, as stars awaken above Mount Parnassus, our story unfolds. In the beginning, there was silence, and in that silence, light waited to be born. Leto, daughter of the Titans, wandered the heavens, her steps guided by pain and perseverance. Hera's jealousy had cursed her to roam endlessly, unable to find a place to bring her children into the world. The land turned its face away from her. Islands drifted aside. Even the seas grew restless beneath her feet. For 9 days and 9 nights, Leto searched. Her hair tangled with salt. Her breath trembled like the wind itself. And yet, within her, a spark of divine warmth refused to fade. It was Apollo, her son of sunlight, waiting to enter the world. At last, she found the floating island of Delos, a lonely piece of earth adrift in the Aegean, surrounded by calm water and endless sky. Delos pitied her. It whispered, "You may rest here." And so, beneath a young palm tree with the silver moon watching from above, Leto gave birth to twins. Artemis first, calm and serene as moonlight, and then Apollo, radiant as dawn. The moment he opened his eyes, the sky brightened, the waves shimmered gold. Even the wind, that eternal wanderer, paused, as if it too wanted to listen. The newborn god did not cry. He merely breathed, and the world itself seemed to hum in harmony. The goddesses who attended the birth, gentle Themis, wise Rhea, bright Dione, washed him in pure spring water, wrapped him in white cloth, and whispered words older than time. Child of light, bring warmth to the hearts of men. Where darkness dwells, may your presence shine. By the time the sun rose, Apollo had grown. Such is the way of gods. He stood tall, golden hair glinting, eyes filled with calm fire. He looked upon his mother and sister, and for the first time smiled, the kind of smile that could make oceans glow. On that same morning, the Muses appeared, their voices carried by a soft breeze. They brought him a gift, the lyre made from tortoise shell and silver, strung with 7 shining threads. The strings vibrated even before he touched them, as if they already knew the songs of eternity. Apollo lifted the lyre and plucked a single note. It rang across the island, smooth and endless, flowing into the waves. The birds fell silent. The sea stilled. Even the clouds seemed to linger, as though caught in reverence. That was the first sound of music the earth had ever known. And from that moment on, Apollo became not only the god of light, but also the god of harmony. He would carry the lyre wherever he went, across mountains, through valleys, even into the hearts of men. And though mortals did not yet know it, that note, that first shimmering vibration in the air, would one day become the seed of every song they would ever sing. As evening fell over Delos, the young god stood upon a high rock and watched the sun sink beneath the sea. Artemis stood beside him, her silver bow resting gently in her hand. "Will they understand your song, brother?" she asked quietly. Apollo gazed at the horizon, where sky met water in a ribbon of gold. "Not yet," he said, "but one day, when they look at the light and feel joy without reason, they will have already begun to hear it." The stars blinked awake above them. The twin gods stood together in silence, watching as night reclaimed the sky, their light a promise to the world below. And far beyond, where mortals dreamed, the faint echo of a divine melody drifted through their sleep. The sea still shimmered around Delos like liquid glass. Morning light spilled lazily across the island, gliding over white rocks and quiet palm leaves. Apollo sat alone near the water's edge, the lyre resting upon his knees. He had held it for days now, but the instrument still felt like a mystery. Its strings seemed alive, humming faintly even when untouched, as though remembering the songs of the universe itself. He brushed his fingers across them once, very gently. The sound that came was not a single note, but a breath, warm, golden, and filled with something he could not name. The air trembled. Waves rolled in slower, as if listening. Apollo smiled. "Even the sea understands," he murmured. A small bird landed nearby, a dove, its feathers catching the light. It tilted its head at the god, curious, and when Apollo plucked another string, it chirped in answer, trying to mimic the tone. The exchange made him laugh softly, a sound that seemed to ripple through the wind. He began to experiment, a low tone to greet the earth beneath him, a higher one to reach the heavens above, and between them, a bridge of melody, something new, something no one had heard before. The muses, far away upon Mount Helicon, paused in their own singing to listen. One whispered to another, "The child of light is learning the language of the world." By midday, the island itself felt changed. The breeze came slower. The trees leaned toward him, their leaves trembling to the rhythm of his playing. Even the fish beneath the surface swam closer to shore, gathering beneath the golden shimmer that danced upon the sea. Leto watched from a distance, seated upon a rock shaded by an olive tree, her eyes filled with a mother's quiet pride. She had suffered much to bring this child into being, and now, as she watched him discover the sound that would one day echo through every corner of the world, her heart filled with peace. When the sun reached its highest, Apollo rested the lyre upon his lap and looked toward the horizon. "Music," he whispered, "is light that can be heard." He closed his eyes and played again, slower this time. The notes flowed together like gentle waves meeting the shore. The world seemed to pause in reverence. No thunder, no divine fanfare, only stillness filled with sound. High upon Olympus, the other gods felt it. Zeus lifted his gaze from the storm clouds he was shaping and smiled faintly. Even Ares, the restless god of war, halted mid-stride, his sword half drawn, confused by a calm he could not fight. Aphrodite leaned upon the balcony of her temple, eyes soft with wonder. "Harmony," she whispered, "finally walks among us." But not all were pleased. Far beneath the earth, in the dim caves where echoes slept, the spirits of chaos stirred. They disliked order. They lived for noise and confusion, for the crack of storms, the roar of beasts, the endless shouting of mortals. This new sound, this measured peace, frightened them. It was too beautiful, too quiet. Apollo sensed them faintly, the trembling at the edge of his melody, a shadow behind the light. He did not stop playing. Instead, he softened his tone, letting the song become more delicate, more human. The darkness recoiled, unable to follow something so calm. And for the first time in ages, even the underworld heard silence. The day drifted on. As the sun bent toward evening, a group of nymphs appeared from the groves. They moved shyly, drawn by the sound they had never known before. "Play for us," one whispered, her voice like falling water. Apollo nodded. He plucked the strings again, and the air filled with gold. The nymphs danced barefoot across the sand, their movements slow, hypnotic, a rhythm born of instinct. The wind swirled softly around them, joining the harmony. Every living thing, the sea, the trees, even the stones, seemed to breathe in unison. For hours, there was only music, no words, no prayers, just the heartbeat of creation itself. When the final note faded, Apollo placed the lyre beside him and looked to the sky. The first stars were appearing, shyly at first, then brighter. He whispered to them, "Do you hear it? This is what your light would sound like, if it could sing." The stars did not answer, but they twinkled, and the waves sighed, a kind of celestial applause. Night fell gently over Delos. A soft mist rolled from the sea, cool and silver under the moon. Apollo lay back upon the sand, hands behind his head, listening to the echo of his own music still lingering in the air. It was a quiet satisfaction, not pride, not vanity, but peace, the kind of peace that belongs to beginnings. He closed his eyes and smiled. Tomorrow he would travel beyond this island. Tomorrow he would bring the lyre's voice to the world. But for now, the god of light slept, and even in sleep, his fingers twitched lightly, as though still strumming invisible strings. Above him, the stars sang their silent song, and the sea whispered the chorus back. The world had heard harmony for the first time, and nothing would ever be quite the same again. When morning returned, it came quietly. The air above Delos was pale gold, soft as a whisper. Apollo awoke to the sound of waves brushing the shore, each one fading like a slow heartbeat. He sat up, the lyre resting beside him, glowing faintly in the sunlight. For a moment, he simply watched the sea. "Yesterday," he murmured, "the island listened." He looked toward the horizon, endless blue dotted with faint ships of mortals crossing from one unknown to another. "Now," he said, "the world must listen." He rose, slinging the lyre across his back. As he walked, the sand barely shifted beneath his feet. Even nature seemed reluctant to disturb his calm. By noon, Apollo reached the highest hill of Delos, the same hill where his mother had once prayed for his birth. He stood there, the sun blazing behind him, and for the first time since his arrival on Earth, he sang. No words, only melody. His voice and the lyre merged into one, echoing across the sea like sunlight rippling through water. The sound carried far, across islands, through forests, over mountains, until it reached the hearts of men and beasts alike. In a distant fishing village, an old man paused mid-step as he mended his nets. He lifted his head, squinting toward the sky, confused. He had never heard such a tone. It wasn't loud nor forceful, but it felt right. The rhythm of the waves suddenly matched the rhythm of his breath. He smiled, though he could not say why. In the fields of Thessaly, shepherds tending their flocks stopped and looked to the east. Their sheep stood still, ears twitching. The youngest shepherd whispered, "Do you hear that?" "It's only the wind," the elder said, but his voice trembled, because deep down he knew it wasn't. Farther still, in the marble courtyards of Olympus, the gods themselves gathered. Hermes leaned lazily against a pillar, grinning. "Ah," he said, "my brother has found his sound." Aphrodite closed her eyes, letting the melody wash over her like a tide of light. Even Athena, ever so composed, allowed herself a faint smile. "It is balanced," she said quietly. "Neither too proud nor too humble." Zeus listened longest of all. He had ruled storms, thunder, and power beyond measure. But this was something else. A strength that required no force. A command that came through calm. When the final note faded, he spoke softly. "Let him play. The world will be gentler because of it." Down below, in the world of mortals, something extraordinary was happening. The melody was changing people, not in body, but in spirit. Arguments paused. Tools were lowered. Even the marketplace of Athens, usually loud and filled with chaos, fell into an odd stillness. Merchants and buyers stood side by side, looking toward the same horizon. A young woman selling olives began to hum along, though she didn't know the tune. Her voice trembled at first, then steadied. A child joined, her, then another. Soon, the whole street was humming softly, imperfect, human, but beautiful. The god's song had become theirs, and Apollo, standing high upon his hill, smiled. "That," he whispered, "is what harmony truly means." The lyre's strings shimmered beneath his fingers, golden threads weaving between heaven and earth. Every pluck created not just sound, but light. Tiny sparks that drifted into the air and vanished like fireflies. The mortals below could not see them, but they could feel them. The warmth behind every tone. The warmth of connection. From that day forward, music belonged to humankind. When the sun began to sink, Apollo made his way inland, walking through olive groves heavy with fruit. He passed farmers who had left their fields to sit together beneath the trees, singing the simple tune they had heard that morning. The god said nothing. He only listened. Each imperfect voice added something real to the song. Joy, sadness, longing, peace. Every note told a story that no god could ever create alone. At dusk, Apollo reached a small village where a child sat by the riverbank, crying over a broken flute. He knelt beside her. "Why tears?" he asked gently. "My song is gone," she whispered, holding the snapped reed in her hands. Apollo smiled and touched the pieces. They mended themselves with a faint shimmer. "Then sing again," he said. The girl looked up, eyes wide. "Who are you?" "Someone who listens," he replied, and walked away. The girl lifted the flute to her lips and played. Her tune was simple, trembling, imperfect, but across the valley it joined a greater harmony. The god's melody still hung in the air, and now it welcomed hers. That night, Apollo climbed the last hill before Delphi. The stars were bright, the air filled with the scent of pine and warm earth. He sat beneath a tree, gazing upward. Somewhere far away, mortals were still singing, 1,000 small voices echoing his own. He realized then that music had never truly belonged to him. He was only its messenger, its guardian. The lyre in his hands was not a weapon of glory or pride, but a bridge a way for gods and mortals to meet halfway, in sound instead of words. He began to play again, not for an audience, not for Olympus, but for the night itself. The melody was softer now, deeper. It carried the hush of moonlight, the murmur of distant rivers, the sigh of the sleeping world. Birds settled on nearby branches to listen. A fox curled beneath a rock, its breathing slow and peaceful. Even the stars seemed to shimmer in rhythm. And when the final note faded into silence, Apollo whispered to the wind, "May every heart remember this stillness." The world did. Long after the god's song was gone, echoes of it remained. In every lullaby, every chant by the fire, every hum of a mother soothing her child. The day Apollo taught humans to sing was not the day music began. It was the day silence learned to listen. The world was quiet again. Too quiet. The echo of Apollo's melody had faded from the skies, leaving behind something that felt both full and empty at once, like a dream that still lingered in the chest, long after waking. For many days, humankind listened to that silence. They worked the soil. They fetched water from the wells. They cooked and spoke, and laughed softly beneath the olive trees. But deep inside, each of them carried the same ache, the memory of a sound so beautiful it had changed the way their hearts beat. They remembered the warmth that had filled their bodies when the god's song swept through the air. They remembered how their hands had stilled without meaning to, how their breath had slowed. And yet, no one could recreate it. No mortal voice could capture that golden resonance of Apollo's lyre. No flute carved by human hands could summon the same harmony. So they tried, again and again, and failed. Each attempt ended in frustration or laughter, but something within them had shifted. The silence that followed the god's song was not empty. It was sacred. In a small village near the slopes of Parnassus, the people began to gather every evening as the sun went down. They would sit around a small fire and stare into the flames, the light flickering in their eyes like trapped stars. The air smelled of roasted barley and burning pine wood. An old man with a gray beard would sometimes bring out a small wooden flute. It was crude, uneven, a hollow reed polished by his thumb. He would place it to his lips and blow. A thin note would escape, trembling, unsure of itself. Children would giggle, and the old man would smile. Then he'd try again. Another note, this time lower, sadder, like a sigh. And so it went. Night after night, a handful of sounds scattered through the dusk. No rhythm, no melody. Only small, uncertain breaths of humanity. But each night, the people came back. They came not because the music was good, but because it was theirs. And somewhere high above, on the slopes of Mount Helicon, Apollo watched. He didn't play. He didn't guide them. He only listened, smiling faintly, like a parent watching their child take its first step. One evening, the moon rose earlier than usual. Its silver glow spilled across the fields, turning every blade of grass into a shimmer of light. The villagers gathered again, men, women, and children, their faces glowing faintly in the moonlight. No one spoke for a while. The air was heavy, like the pause before something sacred. Then, a soft wind brushed through the trees, carrying with it a faint hum. The kind of hum that happens when a heart wants to speak, but doesn't yet know how. The villagers looked toward the youngest among them, a girl named Thaleia. She was small, barely more than a child, but her eyes carried the calm of the sea. Her hands were folded in her lap, clutching a broken piece of pottery she had shaped earlier that day. She didn't know why, but she felt something stirring deep inside, a pull that began in her chest and rose toward her throat. The night was so still that when she exhaled, it sounded like the wind itself was breathing through her. Her lips parted. At first there was no sound. Then came a single note, soft, almost accidental. It hung in the air, trembling like a candle flame. The others froze. Even the fire seemed to pause its crackling. Thaleia blinked, startled by her own voice. But then, she tried again. This time the note rose higher, still imperfect, still human, but alive. And just like that, the silence broke. The villagers listened, not to a god, not to a lyre, but to one of their own. Something ancient within them stirred. They had heard the sound of divinity before, but this was different. It wasn't distant or untouchable. It came from among them, fragile yet brave. The fire's glow deepened, and the shadows around them began to sway, as if the earth itself wanted to listen. Thaleia's mother closed her eyes and began to hum softly, following the girl's tone. Her hum trembled at first, then steadied, a warm counterpoint to her daughter's voice. Others joined in, hesitantly. A low hum here, a breathy tone there, no words, no melody, only sound, raw, unshaped, but pulsing with life. The air seemed to shimmer. A breeze moved gently through the olive trees, carrying their voices into the dark hills beyond. Somewhere an owl called, and its cry folded perfectly into their rhythm. The river nearby murmured, as if keeping time. For the first time, the world didn't just listen to humans. It sang with them. Apollo, watching from afar, felt something stir within his immortal chest. It wasn't pride nor jealousy, but a deep, indescribable tenderness. He saw how fragile their song was, how easily it could break, how uncertain it sounded. And yet, it was pure. It was theirs. A spark of creation that needed no divine touch. He whispered into the wind, "Let no god claim this as his own. Let this belong only to them." The stars above seemed to pulse brighter in silent agreement. Down below, the people of the village sang on, their voices blending with the night. Some tones rose like laughter, others fell like sighs. Their sound was not perfect, but it didn't need to be. It was honest. When the song finally faded, no one spoke. They sat together by the dying fire, the moonlight silvering their faces. The silence that followed was no longer heavy. It was peaceful, alive. Thaleia looked at her mother, eyes wide, and whispered, "Was that music?" Her mother smiled, brushing a curl from her daughter's face. "Yes," she said, "and it was beautiful." From that night onward, the people no longer waited for the gods to sing. They began to hum as they worked. They sang to their children as they slept. They sang to the dawn, to the rain, to the sea. Each note they released carried the memory of that sacred night. The night the silence of the world was broken by a single mortal voice. And though the gods above remained silent, the earth itself seemed to smile. The next morning arrived with a gentleness that felt new. The first light of dawn slid across the mountains, spilling like golden silk over the fields. Mist drifted above the valley, and the dew shimmered on every blade of grass. The village stirred slowly, farmers stepping out of their homes, stretching their arms toward the rising sun. But something in the air was different. No one could explain it, yet everyone felt it. It was as if the silence of the night had left behind a faint rhythm, a pulse beneath the morning wind. Thaleia awoke with that rhythm still inside her. She didn't dream of it because she hadn't needed to. It had stayed with her, soft, like a warmth that wouldn't fade. Her throat tingled slightly when she breathed, and she found herself humming without realizing it. The same small tone from the night before, but steadier now. Her mother, kneading bread near the fire, paused and looked over. The sound made her chest tighten, not from sadness, but from something close to awe. She didn't speak. She simply watched her daughter hum, a child unaware that she had already changed the world. By midday, the villagers gathered again beneath the olive trees, their shadows stretching long on the ground. Someone brought food, another carried a clay jug of wine. They sat together, not in celebration, not in ceremony, but in quiet expectation. The memory of the night before still lingered between them, fragile yet sacred. Thaleia sat near the center, her small hands resting on her knees. The old man with the flute was beside her, carving patterns into the wood. He smiled at her gently. "Last night," he said, "your voice carried farther than the moonlight." Thaleia looked at him curiously. "Did you hear it too?" He nodded. "Everyone did." Then with a chuckle he added, "Even the gods, I think." Thaleia laughed, the sound bright and light. But beneath that laughter, her heart beat fast. The memory of the song still lingered in her chest, and she wanted to hear it again, not from Apollo's lyre, but from herself, from them. So she stood. The chatter faded. All eyes turned toward her. She was small against the backdrop of the olive grove, a child wrapped in linen, her hair shimmering like river water under the sun. She didn't speak. She simply closed her eyes, drew a long breath, and began to sing. This time it was no hum. It was a song, soft, trembling, rising from her heart like a prayer. No one taught her the melody. It came unbidden, as if born from the silence itself. Her voice carried the warmth of the morning, the scent of the trees, the rhythm of her own heartbeat. It flowed, slow and tender, every wordless note drifting into the air like petals. The old man stopped carving. The children stopped whispering. Even the cicadas fell quiet. And then, like the faintest breeze passing through wheat fields, the villagers began to join her. One by one, their voices rose, around her, deep, high, broken, whole, no longer in imitation, but in communion. Each person added their own breath, their own story. The sound became vast, rolling through the grove and spilling across the fields. A shepherd tending his flock far away turned and looked toward the village, his sheep frozen mid-step. He couldn't hear the words, but he could feel them. High above, Apollo stood on a cliff overlooking the valley. He didn't move. He didn't breathe. For the first time in eternity, he felt the need to listen, truly listen. The sound below him was imperfect, yes, rough, uneven, but it was alive. It was not divine, it was human. And in its imperfection lay something purer than celestial harmony, the beauty of effort, of reaching beyond oneself to touch the infinite. He whispered to the sky, "So this is how creation sounds when mortals remember they are part of it." His voice was almost lost to the wind. He placed his hand on his lyre, but he did not play. He knew that to do so would be to disturb something sacred. The song below needed no god to complete it. It was whole. As the villagers sang, the world began to answer. The wind joined first, swirling through the branches with a rhythm that seemed to dance between their voices. Then came the river, its steady murmur turning to harmony, echoing the rise and fall of their tone. Birds perched on the olive trees, their small throats fluttering. A dove cooed softly, matching Thalea's melody. The entire valley became one great instrument, alive with sound. The air vibrated, the earth seemed to breathe. Even the clouds, drifting lazily above, appeared to slow their passage, as if listening. The villagers didn't know how long they sang. Time slipped away. Somewhere between one heartbeat and the next, the song became larger than them. It became everything. It filled their chests, their veins, their minds. And when it finally began to fade, no one felt sadness, only peace. When the last note vanished into the horizon, the silence that followed was not empty. It pulsed softly, alive, glowing, eternal. Thalea opened her eyes. Tears streamed down her cheeks, though she didn't know why. Her mother rushed forward and knelt beside her, placing her hands on the girl's shoulders. "My child," she whispered, "what did you sing?" Thalea shook her head. "I don't know," she said softly. "It just came." The old man bowed his head. "It didn't come from you, little one," he murmured. "It came through you." And at that moment, though none of them could see it, Apollo smiled, a quiet, luminous smile that reached the heavens. That evening, the world was changed forever. The gods had created light, the sea, the stars, and the voice of the wind. But only humankind had created song. It was their gift to existence. A gift born not of power, but of longing. Not of divinity, but of heart. As dusk settled, and the first stars appeared, Thalea sat alone beneath the olive trees. The wind brushed through the leaves, carrying a faint echo of her melody. She whispered to the dark, "Was that what the gods hear when they look down on us?" And somewhere above, unseen but ever present, a whisper returned. Soft, distant, infinite. "No, Thalea. That is what the gods feel when they remember love." Days passed, and the valley no longer sounded the same. The laughter of children, the footsteps of farmers, the whisper of the wind through olive trees, everything carried a quiet rhythm. People began to hum without meaning to. A melody followed them wherever they went, threading through their lives like sunlight slipping between leaves. It was not forced. It was simply there, alive. Travelers passing through the village heard it too. They stopped on the dirt paths, listening to the air as though it were speaking. When they asked what the tune was, the villagers only smiled and said, "It isn't a song you learn, it's a song you remember." Word spread quickly, from one shepherd to another, from a fisherman on the shore to a trader climbing the hills. Each carried a fragment of the melody, humming as they walked. Some sang it to their children by the fire. Others whistled it while working in the fields, and without knowing it, they became part of the song's endless journey. Weeks later, it reached the mountains. Echoes rolled through the valleys like soft thunder. In distant towns, people began to gather, not for worship or trade, but simply to listen. They didn't know who had first sung the tune. They didn't even know its name. They just knew it stirred something ancient inside them, something older than memory, yet familiar as breath. On the island of Delos, A priest stood before the altar of Apollo. He raised his eyes to the sun and whispered, "Lord of the lyre, what is this sound that moves through our people?" But the god did not answer, for he was already listening. From his golden temple, Apollo watched as mortals carried his light farther than he ever could. Their song had become a bridge between heaven and earth, woven not from power, but from yearning. Back in the small valley where it all began, Thaleia sat beside the stream. She was older now, not in years, but in presence. There was something different in her eyes, a calm awareness that no child should yet have known. She still sang softly to the water. And when she sang, ripples formed on the surface, spreading outward in perfect circles. One afternoon, a group of travelers approached. Their clothes were dusty, their sandals worn thin. Among them were strangers, a potter, a seer, a mother with a newborn, a soldier returning from the coast. They carried stories from faraway lands, but more than that, they carried the melody. When they saw Thaleia, they stopped, and when she smiled and began to hum, they recognized it instantly. Their voices joined hers, shyly at first, then stronger. Some sang high, others low. No one led, no one followed. They simply merged. The sound that rose was no longer the voice of a child, or a village, or a single people. It was the voice of humankind. It carried sorrow and joy, memory and hope, silence and heartbeat. Every tone felt like a prayer. Every breath, a reminder that they were alive. As the song spread, it began to take shape, not as a fixed melody, but as a living one. Everywhere it went, people changed it slightly. On the islands, they sang it faster, letting the waves keep rhythm. In the mountains, they sang it slow and deep, letting the echoes linger. In the cities, musicians added instruments, lyres carved from cedar, flutes made of bone, drums stretched with goatskin. Each voice, each instrument, became a new verse in the world's growing symphony. The gods watched with silent wonder. Even Zeus, seated upon Olympus, felt something stir within him, a faint warmth, the kind he had long forgotten. He turned to Hera and said quietly, "They have taken the spark of divinity and turned it into song." Hera, still cold from centuries of jealousy, did not reply. But deep inside, she too heard the echo of Thaleia's voice, and it reminded her of the time before anger, the time when love still ruled Olympus. As the moon climbed the night sky, the world began to hum again. From the smallest hut to the grandest temple, voices rose one after another, intertwining. Villages far apart sang in unison without knowing the others existed. Seas carried the sound from coast to coast. The stars shivered with faint resonance. Some said that if you stood perfectly still that night, you could hear the earth itself singing, a deep, low vibration that lived beneath the soil and stone. And if you placed your ear to the ground, you might hear what Apollo heard, a world in perfect harmony with its own breath. At dawn, Thaleia returned to the hill overlooking the valley. The air was cool, the horizon gold. Her voice, tired yet radiant, rose one final time. It was not the loudest note, not the most beautiful, but it was pure. And when she sang, her song did not stay bound to the wind. It drifted upward through the morning sky, past the clouds, past the light, until it reached the heavens. There, Apollo closed his eyes. He placed his hand over his heart and whispered, "Let their song never end." He struck one single note on his lyre, a tone so soft it could barely be heard. and that tone merged with Thalea's final breath, becoming one. From that moment on, the gods no longer needed to command the world with storms or fire. They only needed to listen, for wherever mortals sang, they would find traces of themselves, reminders that even the smallest voice could shape eternity. That night, the first temple to Apollo's lyre was built, not of marble or gold, but of sound. It existed only in the air, only for those who listened deeply enough. It was said that if one stood by the olive trees in that valley and closed their eyes, they could still hear it, 1,000 voices, ancient yet alive, rising and falling with the rhythm of the earth. No one remembered Thalea's face. No one knew where she went after that day. But her song remained. In every hymn, every whisper, every heartbeat, it became the pulse of humankind. The eternal echo of the moment when mortals first learned not just to speak, but to sing. High above the earth, where mortal eyes could never reach, Olympus stood silent. The wind that usually danced between its marble pillars had grown still, as if holding its breath. For the first time in an age, the gods were listening. From the edge of the mountain, Apollo sat with his lyre resting on his knees. His golden hair glimmered in the pale light, but his face was serene, calm as the sea before dawn. Around him, the other gods gathered quietly. Athena with her owl perched beside her, Artemis leaning on her bow, even Hermes for once without mischief in his smile. The sound that drifted from the mortal world was unlike any prayer they had ever heard. It was not a plea for rain or mercy, not an offering for favor or power. It was something else, a sound without demand, born only from wonder. The mortals were not calling to the gods. They were calling with them, and that, Apollo realized, made all the difference. Far below, the earth pulsed with harmony. The song had no single beginning and no clear end. It wove through rivers, forests, and deserts alike, touching every life it passed. Even the animals stilled to listen. Wolves lifted their heads under the moon. Birds changed their flight patterns to glide with the rhythm. The sea swayed softly, its waves no longer crashing but breathing. For a fleeting moment, the boundary between divine and mortal vanished. The world, in all its chaos, hunger, and imperfection, found a rare stillness. And in that stillness, something sacred awakened. Aphrodite was the first to speak. Her voice, gentle yet laced with awe, broke the silence of Olympus. "Do you hear it, brother?" she whispered. "They sing as we once did, before pride divided us." Apollo nodded slowly. "It is not their voices I hear," he said. "It is their hearts." Zeus turned his gaze toward the horizon. The king of gods, who had ruled through thunder and command for centuries, looked strangely humbled. "In all our power," he murmured, "we could never have made such beauty." Hermes chuckled under his breath, trying to hide the emotion in his tone. "Maybe," he said softly, "mortals finally learned the secret of Olympus, that harmony is stronger than lightning." Even Hera said nothing. For once her eyes softened. Perhaps she remembered her own motherhood, or perhaps she saw in the mortal's song the reflection of her own long-lost tenderness. As the melody continued, Apollo plucked the strings of his lyre almost unconsciously. Each note he played was faint, blending perfectly with the voices below. Soon, a second tone joined the first, Athena's soft hum resonating with wisdom. Then Artemis added her flute-like whistle, sharp and pure as moonlight, Even Poseidon struck his trident lightly against the stone, letting the echo ripple through the ocean depths. One by one, the gods added their voices to the song. No commands, no hierarchy, just harmony. The heavens and the earth became a single choir. Down below, no one knew what was happening. Fishermen hummed by their boats. Children laughed while splashing in the rivers. Old men tapped their fingers against wooden tables in rhythm. Yet somehow they felt it, that their humble voices had reached beyond the stars. A faint golden shimmer spread across the night sky. Some said it was the reflection of Apollo's lyre. Others believed it was the gods smiling upon them. But most didn't try to explain. They simply sang louder, letting the sound fill the night like a tide rising to meet the moon. Then, for just a breath, the entire world fell silent. The mountains ceased to echo. The waves paused mid-crash. The wind itself stopped moving. And from the heart of that silence came one sound. Clear, resonant, eternal. It was Apollo. He plucked a single note, brighter than dawn, deeper than thunder. That note carried across the heavens, across the sea, through the veins of the earth. It struck the hearts of every living creature, from the smallest insect to the mightiest king. For a moment, every being in existence remembered who they were. Not rulers, not slaves, not gods or mortals, but part of a single, infinite breath. Tears shimmered in Aphrodite's eyes. Athena lowered her head in reverence. Even Zeus rose to his feet, his thunderbolts forgotten. And Apollo, voice soft as a sigh, said only this: "Let this song never belong to one. Let it live in all." He lifted his lyre once more and laid it across the sky. The stars trembled, realigning themselves into a new constellation, 7 bright points that formed the shape of the sacred instrument. It was his gift to humankind, a reminder that the music of creation lives forever above them. As the song faded, night returned to its gentle rhythm. The sea began to move again. The wind exhaled softly through the trees. Somewhere, a child laughed in her sleep. And in that laughter, pure, small, and fleeting, Apollo heard the future of humankind. They would fight wars, build temples, fall in love, lose faith, rediscover hope. But always, in some hidden corner of the heart, they would carry the rhythm of that first song. For every lullaby sung by a mother, every hymn whispered by a monk, every melody hummed by a lonely traveler, all were fragments of that night when mortals first sang with gods. In time, people would forget Thalea's name. They would forget the valley, the olive trees, even the night the stars danced. But the song, that eternal breath between heaven and earth, would never die. It lived in the wind that carried ships across the Aegean. It lived in the waves that touched every shore. It lived in the silence between 2 heartbeats. And if you listen closely, in the quiet moments before sleep, when the world softens and your mind drifts, you might still hear it. A faint hum in the distance, a whisper of the gods, a memory older than time. The song of Apollo, the day humans learned to sing. The valley of Delphi lay quiet under the fading light. A thin veil of gold brushed across the slopes, clinging to the olive trees before dissolving into the shadowed hills. The air was warm, yet gentle, the kind of warmth that hums softly in the heart long after the day has ended. From the east, a group of travelers appeared. weary figures wrapped in cloaks faded by sun and wind. They walked slowly, their sandals coated in dust, their eyes lifted toward the glowing horizon. They were not merchants, nor warriors, nor wanderers in search of coin. They were seekers. No one among them could say exactly when the journey began. Some had followed the sound of a song carried by the wind. Others had dreamed of a golden lyre shining in the sky. But all were drawn by something unseen, a whisper of harmony that lived between silence and breath. They called themselves the listeners. At the head of the small group walked an old man named Lysandros. His beard was silver, his posture slightly bent, yet there was strength in his eyes, the quiet kind that comes from faith, not pride. In his youth, he had been a sculptor, shaping marble into human faces. But one night, as he worked under the moon, he heard a melody drift across the valley, a melody that no hand could carve, no chisel could capture. From that moment, he stopped sculpting stone and began searching for the source of the song. Now, decades later, he walked among the others, men and women of every age and land, each carrying a different story, yet sharing the same silence. They rarely spoke. They didn't need to. The rhythm of their footsteps was enough. Behind them trailed a boy of perhaps 12, holding a reed flute tied to his belt. His name was Arias. He had never known the gods nor the world beyond his village, but he had heard tales of a child's voice that once sang beside a river, of the song that awakened all humankind. And so, when he saw the travelers pass through his town, he followed, barefoot and smiling, without asking where they were going. The road grew narrow as the sun began to sink behind the mountains. Shadows reached long fingers across the path. Somewhere, a stream murmured softly, its voice blending with the low hum of cicadas. The travelers slowed their pace. No one spoke. No one needed to. Each of them felt it, that faint vibration in the air, like the echo of a note struck long ago. It seemed to rise from the earth itself, pulsing gently underfoot. Some believed it was the breath of Apollo. Others thought it was the memory of the first human song, still lingering after generations. Lysandros simply smiled and said, "The gods have long ceased to speak with thunder. Now they speak with silence." As they climbed higher, the valley opened before them. Below lay terraces of ancient olive trees, their silver leaves shimmering in the dying light. Beyond, the distant sea glowed like molten glass, calm and endless. The boy Arias gasped, softly, for he had never seen such beauty. Not painted, not told, but alive. When night began to fall, the travelers stopped beside a circle of stones. It was said that this place once marked the resting spot of a priest who had listened to the gods until his final breath. No shrine remained, only stones covered in moss and wild thyme. Yet the air seemed sacred. The group lit a small fire, its flames flickering softly, painting their faces in shades of gold and ember. No one prayed aloud. No one dared to break the hush that had settled around them. Instead, the boy Arias lifted his flute. He didn't play a song he knew. He simply blew gently, letting the air itself choose the tune. The sound was fragile, uncertain, but as it drifted upward, the valley seemed to respond. A breeze stirred through the olive branches. The fire bent slightly, as though bowing, and Lysandros closed his eyes. He could almost hear the echoes of another voice, a girl's voice long ago, singing beside a river. They slept beneath the stars that night, their bodies curled near the fading fire. The wind carried whispers, soft, almost human, but older than speech. Some dreamed of shining temples, others of the sea glowing with golden ripples. Orius dreamed of Apollo, not as a god, but as a man sitting quietly beside him, smiling without words. When dawn returned, the group rose in silence. They didn't eat, nor speak. They simply continued walking toward the mountains that framed Delphi like two great sentinels, and though no one mentioned it, each felt lighter, as if the song they sought was already walking beside them. By midday, they reached a ridge overlooking the valley. From there they could see the scattered stones that would one day become the great sanctuary of Apollo. But at that time, it was only emptiness, rocks, grass, and a faint shimmer of heat rising from the soil. Still, Lysandros fell to his knees. Tears filled his eyes. "This," he whispered, "is where silence was first born." The others followed his gaze. They didn't see temples, nor altars, nor signs of the divine, only stillness. And yet, that stillness felt alive, like a breath waiting to be taken. Orius sat beside him, clutching his flute. He wanted to play, but for the first time he didn't. Instead, he listened. The wind moved gently through the grass, carrying a rhythm too soft to name. It was not a song, not yet. But within it, every heart recognized something ancient, the promise that from this silence, sound would be born again. As the sun lowered behind the mountains, the sky turned to copper and rose. The travelers built no campfire this time. They didn't need warmth. The air itself glowed. They simply sat together, motionless, letting the light fade slowly around them. When the first star appeared above Delphi, Lysandros spoke one final time. "Do you hear it?" he asked softly. The boy nodded. "It's the sound between the sounds," Orius said. Lysandros smiled. "Yes," he whispered. "That is where the gods still live." And as night descended over the valley, no one slept. They simply listened to the quiet evening of Delphi, where silence had become sacred, and the song of humankind waited patiently to be born once more. When dawn returned to Delphi, it arrived not with the cry of birds, but with silence. A silence so vast that it seemed to cradle the valley itself. Mist floated between the olive trees, and the first rays of sunlight poured over the ridges like honey. It was in that golden stillness that the travelers realized. They had reached the place where sound had once been born, and where it would be born again. Lysandros rose before the others. He stood at the ridge's edge, his shadow stretching long across the earth. In his heart, he felt something stir, not joy, not sorrow, but a reverent awe. He turned to the group and said quietly, "This is not where we end. This is where we begin again." The boy Orius looked around, confused. "There is nothing here," he said softly. "No temple, no altar." Lysandros smiled. "Exactly," he whispered. "The gods need no walls." As the sun climbed higher, the pilgrims began to move among the stones. No one gave orders. No one spoke of plans. Yet somehow, every person seemed to know what to do. An old woman began clearing a circle in the grass. A young man gathered branches and laid them carefully in the center. A mother drew lines in the soil with her fingertips, shaping symbols she did not remember learning. And the boy Orius sat nearby, running his fingers along the holes of his flute, as though tracing the map of the sky itself. There were no hammers, no chisels, only breath, only rhythm. Only the soft pulse of the earth beneath their feet, steady, eternal, like the beating of a sleeping heart. Hours passed, and yet no one felt hunger. The sun arced across the sky, and the valley filled with light. And when the first breeze swept through the stones, it carried a sound, faint, trembling, like the echo of a voice remembering how to sing. The travelers froze. No one spoke. The sound grew clearer, richer. It wasn't a flute, nor a lyre, nor the voice of any human. It was the wind itself, breathing through the cracks of the stones they had arranged. Orias gasped. He lifted his flute to his lips, hesitant, as if afraid to disturb the sacred air. Then he played a single note, soft, trembling, pure. The wind answered. The two sounds met, merged, and then danced together, not as rivals, but as reflections of one another. Every traveler felt it at once, a vibration that began in the air but ended in the soul. It was not music, it was prayer. And so, without words, they joined in. The woman who had cleared the grass began to hum. A man struck two stones together, softly, again and again, creating a rhythm like the heartbeat of the earth. Lysandros closed his eyes and pressed his palms to the soil. He felt warmth, alive, pulsing, like the breath of the god himself. What they built that day was not made of marble or gold. No columns rose, no altar burned. Yet Delphi had its first temple. It was shaped by harmony, not seen, but heard. As night approached once more, a strange calm descended upon the valley. The fire burned low, but no one wished to sleep. Instead, they sat around the circle of stones, bathed in the glow of starlight. Above them, the constellations shimmered like silent witnesses. Lysandros spoke first, his voice low, as if afraid to wake the stars. Long ago, he said, Apollo taught men to sing. But tonight, it is we who remind the gods how to listen. A murmur passed through the group, not of doubt, but of recognition. For deep inside, they knew he was right. Humanity had learned the divine song once more, not through power nor sacrifice, but through stillness. The old sculptor looked at the boy. Orias, he said, play again. The boy obeyed. He placed his lips to the flute, closed his eyes, and exhaled. The note that emerged was soft as moonlight, barely there, yet enough to stir the stars. It rose higher, higher still, trembling like the wing of a bird, and then, as if guided by unseen hands, the wind carried it across the valley. The olive branches swayed, the fire bent low. Even the stones seemed to hum. And then silence. Perfect silence. The kind that makes the heart ache because it knows something sacred has passed through. For a long while, no one moved. Then Lysandros whispered, "The temple is complete." The others looked around in confusion. There was nothing, no structure, no altar, no monument, only the night, the stars, the air itself shimmering with the echo of the song. "Yes," Lysandros said again, his eyes glistening. "It was never meant to be seen." He turned his gaze toward the heavens. In that moment, a soft light appeared behind the ridge, not from fire nor from the moon. It shimmered gold, gentle, pulsing, and though no voice spoke, they felt it, a presence vast and kind, radiating through every breath. Apollo had come, not in thunder, not in flame, but in silence. The boy's flute slipped from his hands and fell softly into the grass. The travelers bowed their heads, not from fear, but from wonder. For they understood. The temple they had built was not of stone, but of sound. It would never crumble. for it lived within every living heart that still dared to listen. When the light faded, only the stars remained. The group stayed seated, their faces calm, their souls full. No one wept. No one spoke. They simply breathed, sharing the same quiet joy that bound them all. And from somewhere in the valley, a nightingale began to sing, the first song sung by the earth since the dawn of man. Lysandros smiled. Oreius looked up, eyes wide, whispering, "He's still here." The old man nodded. "Yes," he said softly, "as long as we listen." The wind sighed gently through the stones, carrying the echo of the divine melody far into the dark. A promise that even when the gods fall silent, their song still lives, woven forever into the breath of humankind. Night had fully claimed the valley. The fire's glow faded to amber, and the stars seemed to drift closer, as if they too were listening. A breeze wandered through the olive groves, whispering secrets in a tongue older than memory. The air was still, but not empty. It carried something gentle, invisible, alive. Lysandros sat in silence, his cloak drawn tight against the cool air. Across from him, the others rested, not sleeping, but dreaming with their eyes open. Even the children were calm, their faces lit by the faint shimmer of starlight. Then came a sound, faint, like the breath of the world itself. No one could tell where it began. It wasn't the rustle of leaves, nor the murmur of wind. It was softer, deeper, a tone so low and warm that it seemed to rise from the very soil beneath them. Lysandros closed his eyes. He had heard that sound once before, long ago when he was a child, standing by the river. It was the hum of the earth, the same pulse that had always been there. Only now, after a lifetime of noise, he could finally hear it. Beside him, Oreius stirred. The boy's eyes fluttered open, reflecting the stars. He looked to the sky and whispered, "Do you hear it?" Lysandros nodded. "It is not music," he said softly. "It is everything that music came from." The boy smiled faintly and looked back toward the stones. A faint vibration rippled through the ground, steady, slow, peaceful. He pressed his hands to the earth and felt warmth radiating upward, like a living heartbeat. The sound began to change. It deepened, widened, as though unseen voices were joining in. The air shimmered. Between the trees, faint threads of golden light appeared, rising and fading like breath. And then, from somewhere beyond the ridge, came another tone. High, clear, like the pluck of a lyre string stretched across the heavens. It joined the hum below, the two sounds weaving together into a harmony too vast for words. No one dared to move. Even the fire seemed to pause. In that stillness, something inside Oreius shifted. He felt the sound not in his ears, but in his chest. It vibrated through his bones, into his breath, until it became a part of him. He thought he might disappear into it, become nothing, become everything. Then the stars began to shimmer brighter, forming patterns like flowing water. He watched them flicker and twist, and realized they were moving in rhythm with the sounds. Each note seemed to draw a line of light across the sky. It was as if the universe itself was playing a song, and they were sitting at its center. He looked toward Lysandros again, but the old man's eyes were closed. His lips moved silently, repeating a wordless prayer. Oreius wanted to speak, to ask what it meant, but the words died on his tongue. Instead, he listened. He let go of every thought, every question. There was only sound. And then, the world disappeared. He didn't remember falling asleep, but suddenly he was standing in a sea of gold. The light around him shimmered like liquid sunlight. Far ahead, a figure stood, tall, radiant, impossibly calm. Orias took a breath. "Are you—" he began, but the word Apollo never left his lips. He already knew. The god did not speak. He simply looked at the boy with eyes that seemed to hold both sunrise and sunset. A warmth spread through the air, a quiet invitation, not to kneel, but to listen. Orias felt something awaken deep inside him. The flute appeared in his hands, not carved from wood, but shaped from pure light. When he raised it to his lips, he realized he didn't need to breathe. The sound flowed through him, not from him. He played a single note. It stretched endlessly across the horizon, shimmering through the golden air like a thread of silk. Then came another, and another, until the silence itself began to sing back. The boy and the god stood face to face, separated by nothing but the music between them. And when the melody reached its final note, the world dissolved into radiance. Orias awoke with tears on his face. The valley was still dark, but the dawn was near. He sat up slowly, the memory of light still clinging to his skin. The flute lay beside him. For a long while he simply stared at it, unable to move. Lysandros was already awake, watching him with quiet understanding. "Did you see him?" the old man asked. Orias nodded. "I didn't speak," he whispered. "He didn't either, but I knew." Lysandros smiled faintly. "That's how he always speaks," he said, through silence. The others began to stir as the first line of sunlight touched the valley floor. No one seemed surprised that the boy was awake before the dawn. Something had changed in the air. Lighter, calmer, fuller somehow. The fire, long dead, flickered to life without a spark. The stones glowed faintly, like embers remembering their warmth. And when the first bird began to sing, its song blended seamlessly with the hum still resonating from the earth. Orias lifted his flute again. This time, when he played, the sound was softer, human again, fragile, but warm. It carried not the power of gods, but the tenderness of a heart that had listened and understood. The melody drifted through the valley, winding between the olive trees, brushing gently against every ear, every soul. The others sat quietly, eyes closed, letting it wash over them. Some smiled, some wept. The song spoke of dawn, of forgiveness, of a light that didn't blind but comforted. It wasn't divine, yet it felt divine enough. And when it ended, no one clapped, no one cheered. They simply breathed together, humans, fragile and eternal, joined by a sound that needed no name. Lysandros placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Do you hear it now?" he asked. Orias nodded, smiling faintly. "Yes," he said. "The silence sings back." The first light of dawn touched the mountain peaks, like a soft exhale from the sky. The shadows of the olive trees stretched long across the valley, and the air shimmered faintly, not from heat, but from a quiet warmth that had been left behind by the song. The fire in the center of the gathering still glowed, though no one had tended to it. Its embers pulsed slowly, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. The pilgrims sat in silence, their faces calm and open, as if each one had been gently rewritten by the night. No one spoke. No one needed to. Orias stood at the edge of the clearing, The flute hung loosely in his hands, its surface faintly warm beneath his fingers. He looked toward the horizon, where the sun was rising behind a curtain of mist. For a long while he said nothing. Beside him, Lysandros leaned on his staff. His hair gleamed silver in the dawn light, and his eyes, though weary, carried a brightness that felt eternal. "It's strange," he whispered, almost to himself. "I've seen 1,000 mornings, but none like this." Orias turned slightly, his voice soft but steady. "This one feels awake," he said, "as if the world itself has heard the song." They watched as the mist began to lift. The stones of Delphi, once cold and pale, now glowed faintly golden. Birds called from the trees, their notes blending into the last echoes of Orias's melody, still lingering in the valley. The sound of running water drifted through the air, clear and musical, as though the earth itself was humming along. And then came the breeze, light, fragrant, carrying with it the scent of pine and myrtle. It swept through the camp, gently stirring the hair of the sleeping pilgrims, moving the ashes of the fire, and making the olive leaves shimmer like scales of liquid light. Lysandros closed his eyes. "That's him," he murmured. Orias looked at him, puzzled. "The wind?" The old man smiled faintly. "Yes," he said. "When Apollo leaves, he never walks. He travels on the wind, not to be seen, only to be heard." Orias nodded slowly. For a moment he thought he could hear it too, a faint rhythm hidden inside the wind's sigh. It wasn't a melody this time. It was something deeper, a pulse, a breath, a promise. By now the sun had fully risen. Golden light spilled over the stones and onto the pilgrims' faces. One by one, they began to stir, stretching, smiling, looking around as if waking from the same dream. None of them spoke of what they had seen or heard during the night. They didn't have to. Their silence was full, not empty. Some began to gather their things. Others knelt by the stones, touching them lightly, whispering thanks to the God they would never meet again. And though the valley would one day be filled with temples and statues, that morning there was only the earth, the sky, and a handful of humans who had learned how to listen. Orias turned to Lysandros. "What happens now?" he asked. The old man looked toward the rising sun, his face serene. "Now," he said, "you carry it." Orias frowned. "Carry what?" Lysandros smiled. "The song. Not with your flute, with your life." The boy didn't reply. He didn't have to. He understood. The song wasn't just a melody. It was a way of seeing, of feeling the sacred pulse in every quiet thing. The rustle of a leaf, the laughter of water, the stillness between heartbeats. He lifted the flute once more and played a single, soft note. It wasn't divine. It wasn't perfect. But it was true. The note drifted upward, winding through the olive branches and vanishing into the clear morning air. Somewhere far away, a shepherd answered it with a whistle. A woman gathering herbs began to hum, and a child clapped her hands to the rhythm of a bird's song. By noon, the valley of Delphi was alive with small human sounds, untrained, uneven, but filled with light. And though no one knew it then, that was the moment the world began to sing. When the pilgrims departed, they left no carvings, no offerings, no monuments, only footprints in the dust and the memory of a sound too vast to fade. The valley remained quiet, but never silent again. Every breeze that passed through the olive groves seemed to hum a familiar tone. Every stone seemed to echo the warmth of a song once played by a boy and blessed by a god. High above, in the unseen folds of the sky, Apollo watched. His golden form shimmered faintly, dissolving into the light. He no longer needed to walk among them. The music of mortals was enough. He whispered, not aloud, but into the rhythm of the wind. They sing now, not for me, but because they have learned what silence means. As evening approached, the light of Delphi softened once more. The valley glowed gold and rose, as if lit from within. And though the pilgrims had gone, their presence lingered like the scent of rain. If you had stood there, if you had closed your eyes and listened, you might have heard it too. A faint hum beneath the stones, a trace of melody woven into the air. Not loud, not divine, just eternal. The same note that began it all, the same rhythm that beats inside every heart. The song that no one owns and no one forgets. It was and will always be the quiet evening at Delphi. And now, as the light fades once more over Delphi, the story of Apollo drifts quietly into silence. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the god of music still listens, not to the lyres of Olympus, but to the soft, imperfect songs of humankind. Your heartbeat, your breath, your dreams, they all hum the same ancient note. It's easy to forget that. The world can be loud and heavy and filled with voices that speak without truly singing. But when you close your eyes and listen, truly listen, you'll hear what they heard in that sacred valley long ago. A sound that doesn't come from the lips or the strings, but from the quiet within. So as you rest tonight, let your thoughts dissolve like mist over the mountains. Let your breath slow. Let the echoes of this story fade into stillness. You are part of the same song, a single tone in the endless melody of time. Somewhere, the olive leaves still shimmer in the morning wind. Somewhere, a young boy still lifts his flute toward the sky. And somewhere, the god of light still smiles, because humanity learned to sing. Sleep now. Rest beneath the gentle glow of Delphi, and when you wake, may your heart remember its music. Good night.